Dr. Anat Binur co-founded Ukko, a startup biotech focused on leveraging computational technology to understand the biologic immune response to food allergens and in turn engineer proteins to combat that response. But as you'll soon find out, she's not the kind of doctor you might expect her to be. I'm Matt Pillar, and on today's episode of the Business of Biotech, we're going to try to hang on for the wild ride that is Dr. Binur's life. We're going to learn how that wild ride led her to the launch of Ukko. We'll hear about the novel therapeutic approach the company is exploring, and we'll find out what drives one of the most energetic women in the biotech business to continually reinvent herself and challenge those around her. Dr. Binur, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. You know, just taking a cruise through your CV, your LinkedIn profile, even it's like, wow, there's a lot to unpack there in this woman's background. So before we get into sort of
the dots,
there are a lot of dots to connect. And before we get into sort of the therapeutic discussion, that's where I want to start. I want to rewind a little bit and get to know you because your background is pretty exciting. So I'm just going to rattle through some highlights here. If I get anything wrong as I'm rattling through, feel free to interrupt me and correct or add color. But Dr. Binur served in the Israeli Defense Force, earned her LLB, which is a law degree kind of equivalent, I think, to the JD here in the States, clerked for the State Attorney of Israel, served as a legislative fellow in the U.S. House of Representatives, founded MEET, M-E-E-T, an organization that uses tech and business with partners like MIT and Google to bring together and educate future leaders in the Middle East. Earned your Ph.D. in political science with a focus on behavioral economics. While earning your Ph.D. at MIT, you studied large-scale behavioral economics field experiments to empirically test and measure norms of trust and cooperation in game theoretic settings. So it sounds to me like you're an educated manipulator. and I mean
that's one way of looking at it.
I mean that in a kind way. You consulted for the World Bank. You're an investor at Innovation Endeavors, a VC firm partnering with. What's that?
I was.
Yeah, a VC firm partnering with startups that apply cutting-edge technology to transform large industries. So, I mean, kind of all over the map. A lot of really cool experiences. But then it looks like you carved out, as I said, this sort of incredibly successful career influencing people. Maybe that's a more polite way of saying it than manipulating. I want to learn kind of how all these experiences influence your leadership now of an early stage biopharma company. But first, tell me, how did you even become the leader of an early stage biopharma company with the background that you had? I mean, very poli-sci, defense, consultative at a global level. What led you to biopharma?
Yeah. First of all, definitely people often ask me, especially now I'm talking to kind of younger people and they're thinking about their career. It's definitely a story of connecting dots, and sometimes only in retrospect you can understand kind of how these things add value to what you're doing today and how you got to be doing what you're doing. I would say for me, you can see that common theme because the first parts of my career were definitely in the worlds of policy and education and academia and politics. It's very mission driven. So I'd say, first of all, for me, I just feel the most precious thing we have is time. And I want to spend my time on things that matter to me or just feel right to me, because otherwise, what are we doing? So I think I always look for mission-driven things. Prior to starting Ukko, I was on the venture side. I was a partner at a fund called Innovation Endeavors, as you mentioned. And, as a VC, I looked a lot at different technologies. And I was always passion-driven about things that were mission-driven, deep tech, with a really big market opportunity. But at the same time, I always had an itch to get back into the operator seat, which you don't really get to do in a VC seat. So when my co-founder, Professor Yanayu Friend, who's also one of my very close friends from our undergrad days, told me about an idea he'd been working, and it checked all the boxes that I had, been looking for as a VC, things to invest in. I decided that it's time to make the switch and kind of go to what's often called the other side of the table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That Innovation Endeavors during your time there, were you exposed to biotech, biopharm, or was it mostly more on the tech side?
Yes, Innovation Endeavors is a really unique and amazing fund. I'm still very close to the fund. They've invested in Ukko. They sit on my board, and it's a fund in Silicon Valley that invests really in the intersection of very deep tech and big industries, really trying to make an impact on the world. So yes, luckily and fortunately for me, I got a chance to every day look at the most edge technologies that were out there and really think about how they can revolutionize either existing industries and even invent new ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So looking at that, like sort of looking at life sciences as the industry, did you have any reservation kind of going into it around jumping into an industry where you weren't formally educated and didn't necessarily have a lot of career experience, or was it like like most other things in Anat Binur's life, head down, let's go?
I think I'm a mix of things. And luckily for me, I think I'm a mix of an entrepreneur and a VC. So as a VC, you're often very thoughtful. You need to be about what you invest in and really think about all the different risks. And in this case, I have to say, yes, I was apprehensive about jumping into a world that I wasn't familiar with in depth, right? But the hat in me, or I think my DNA that's more entrepreneurial, I think the only way entrepreneurs really move forward is by not thinking about things always as they are, but imagining what they could be and getting really excited about the possibilities. So for me, it was an intersection of understanding that this is a massive opportunity, that it's a really mission-driven problem, and that at the same time, I love learning new things. And I think for me, it was clear about building a strong team around me that will enable me to overcome any gaps that I had in knowledge or experience.
Yeah. Was the specific space food allergens, but medicine? We'll start with medicine in general. Was there any, I guess, personal inspiration to want to be involved in that? I mean, I get the whole kind of mission driven, big change, good for humanity kind of drive. But when you winnow that down into the specific space where Ukko lives, and we're going to jump into that here shortly, was there any specific motivation to say, yes, that there are a lot of problems out there that I could be interested in solving. That one in particular is interesting to me.
Yeah, one, I think food allergies and sensitivities are everywhere, and they definitely touch my life as well. And I'm almost never now, on a call, in the elevator with my neighbors, in a dinner, at a school meeting where it's not a topic of discussion. So it was something that was very top of mind. And it also for me is a perfect example of how much technology can give hope, right? I think we're in this sense in a world that has a lot of issues. The hopeful part of it is that I do think we're at the edge of what technology can do to help us live better, healthier, safer lives. And I saw that intersection as a moment of possibility, and I could see how we could really make a big impact through Ukko.
Yeah. Okay. So we've used the word, we mentioned the company, used the word Ukko several times. What is UKKO for those of you who haven't read the show notes? UKKO. What does the word mean? Where does it come from?
Ukko actually comes from Finland. It is Finnish, and it's from the mythology, from the Finnish mythology. It's one of their gods that really represents kind of the harvest and rains, and it has to do with the origin story of Ukko. We really wanted a word that touches on the things that we do, that isn't overly bio, and also connected a little bit to our personal life. So growing up, I would spend many summers in Finland, and it's a place I really love. And specifically, this connects Ukko and the god Ukko connected to the origin story of Ukko, looking at food and food proteins and crops and so on. And so that's how we picked the word.
I like it. That's a good story. Great visual for sure. So how did you launch it? Just walk us through sort of the launch genesis story, I guess.
Yeah, sure. So interestingly, I think that Ukko really started with looking at a problem in reverse. And this is something that my co-founder and I often says, because it started a lot with his technology and his approach. And he's an incredible scientist, deep in the world of bioinformatics and biophysics. And his work for many years looked at, in a super simplified way, biomolecular recognitions. So in general, I would say when you think about the world of bio and pharma, often what we look at is, can we engineer proteins for better targeting, right? Better in some drug cases, for example, can we engineer antibodies for better targeting and binding? But at some point he said, hold on, if we understand it so deeply, how proteins actually interact and target each other, what happened if we completely reverse it and ask ourselves, could we design proteins for lack of recognition, to not interact at all? And that really sparked a whole kind of, field area in which he started delving into. And he did an initial proof of concept around food allergies and sensitivities, because it's exactly a possible solution for this case because of the way the immune system interacts with proteins in the case of allergy. And he got really interesting results. And that was the point that he came to talk to me while I was on the VC side. And as I said before, I was wowed. I said, this really checks all the boxes for me. And we decided to start the company.
So at that point, very formative, sort of a scientific principle. I'm thinking of it in very simplistic terms, but I'm thinking you could either say, let's attack this problem via the food that we consume, and let's apply some protein engineering to the food that we consume, or you could say, let's approach this problem, biopharmaceutically in people, medicinally, or maybe both. So I'm wondering at what point, as you were kind of presented with the scientific principle that seemed like a great potential solution to a big problem, at what point did you kind of take that ball of clay and start to mold it into something that could be productized, right? Like, and say, we could probably build a company around this. Otherwise, it's just a cool idea.
For sure. And I have to also say here, maybe it's my VC hat on, that entrepreneurs should always remember that what you start with is never where you really end up. And you have to really be open for the journey and the pivots. And Ukko is an example of this, because when we launched Ukko, the idea was really to focus on food. So how can we use these technologies, computational tools and protein design, to really make healthier and safer food? And our goal is really to develop safe wheat and safe peanuts to be eaten, consumed by people with sensitivity and allergy. But as we started delving into that and kind of developing our capabilities and our assays and starting to see some of the results that we were getting, we realized that we actually have a really ability to really have a very holistic approach here and design proteins that are food proteins to be safe and healthy and effective in different ways, both for the food industries, but also as drugs. And this really started evolving as we progressed all the way to where we are today, which is really focused on developing a new therapy for, at the end, any protein-based allergy, but starting with peanut allergy first.
Yeah. So in those early years, you weren't sure if you'd be, engaging the USDA or the FDA or both, or CEDAR or CBER. Like it was sort of up in the air.
That's right. And we actually started engaging and still in conversations with many of those bodies, but definitely built a very interdisciplinary approach. And I think it's one of the strengths of the way we look at this. And in general, I should say, for food allergies and sensitivities, for a long time, there have been silos in this world where people really either focused on the drug side or on the kind of food side. And the idea is, can we really intersect the two really, really well so that we have a deep understanding of how our immune system works, how it interacts with the food proteins? Can we understand food proteins really in depth, and then look at products very holistically in developing from food all the way to drug?
Yeah. Does the science, lend itself to any particular food allergen or any particular food allergy indication that is more low-hanging fruit or a better target for you than others?
Yeah, so it's not about a low-hanging fruit. Actually, it's a big-hanging fruit, but we're focused first. We're starting with food allergy, and specifically peanut allergy as our first kind of indication, with the goal of creating a new way to treat peanut allergy. But our approach, which I can talk about in a minute a bit more at the end, will be able to create solutions and products for any protein-based allergy. That means other food allergens, environmental, respiratory allergies, and also even venom-based allergies. If the allergy is protein-based, our approach eventually will be able to create solutions for this.
Yeah. You mentioned that the current sort of care paradigm, I mean, as far as I know, from a consumer perspective, when it comes to food allergies, On the food side, there's it's a very market driven kind of, focus probably on digestive issues like gluten-free and celiac and that kind of thing. But you don't necessarily see any companies, Planters isn't out there right now that I know of saying like, hey, there's a safe peanut your kids can take in their lunch to school. But on the medicinal side, on the therapeutic side of treating allergies, you mentioned there's also a sort of a siloed approach there. So tell me a little bit about, science. Your science obviously is going to step in hopefully and solve some problems. But why is it an opportune time to do that? What is the problem with the current therapeutic care paradigm on the food allergy landscape?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll start by saying, I think it's a very hopeful time for patients who have food allergies or sensitivities. You see really growing efforts in the space. First of all, FDA actually approved the first drug in 2020, which is wonderful and great news. And second, every day I'm hearing about new companies that are launching and very diverse set of approaches on how to tackle this problem. So in general, it's exciting and I think very, very hopeful. However, there are limitations, and some of them are based on just the fact that there's just so much unknown about what is going on here. Like I grew up in New York and Israel. I never had a kid in my class with food allergy, and now it's really everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. What is going on here exactly? And how is one patient different from another? So there's a lack of, we still need to gather a lot more data and understand the problem better. And second is that many of the approaches have been even technologically limited, and the end result is often poor patient experience, right? And it's one of the main challenge in this space. Specifically, if you look at some of the existing approaches, they really focus on using the peanut itself in order to expose patients or to treat patients. And the main hurdle there is that really this causes a trade-off, because in this case, kind of the curative compound, which is the peanut, is also what we can call like the toxic compound, the thing we're actually reacting to, which is the peanut. So this creates a deadlock, right? Which forces us into this trade-off all the time between efficacy and safety. There's a limit what route of administration I can use, how much I can dose the patient, because there's always a risk level that I have to kind of walk around, right? And the question that Ukko really sits in the midst of is, can we modulate, shift your immune system without triggering this allergic response, without kind of this more toxic, problematic part? And this is really where our platform comes in, because by using and harnessing, this is the opportunity for us, right? AI and immunology and very, very advanced protein design, protein engineering, we manage to break this deadlock because we're able to go to a protein and design it such that we kind of can really pick which parts of the protein we want to maintain structure and stability, and the parts that are actually causing the good side of the therapy, the teaching of the immune system, and kind of get rid or engineer away the parts of the protein that are actually triggering the allergic response. So our goal at the end will be to create kind of a whole new way to treat allergy, such that you can really improve the patient experience. You won't have all the side effects and the reactions as you're going through the treatment. Maybe we can even cut down some of the time of the treatment and create more efficacious treatment. Right now, patients really face a very hard, long process that can sometimes take years, and at the end still leave them in a place which is safer. And that is so, so important, but not necessarily a cure.
Sure. Yeah. I can only imagine. I mean, I've shared on the show, in fact, in similar conversations with protein engineers and folks working in the allergic therapy space, that I in my early 20s developed some seasonal allergies that were severe, certainly not life-threatening, but severe, and therefore, subjected myself to the testing, and then years and years and years of therapy exposure to those allergens in small doses, and it did help. But boy, was it a commitment, and that's for a mild sort of annoyance, right? It's certainly far from life-threatening, but weekly and then bi-weekly and then monthly for years on end.
And if you think about parents and the kids themselves, this is really a very hard process to go through, often with a lot of monetary and emotional and and financial and operational implications. And it's a lot to ask from patients. But at the same time, peanut allergy and other allergies can be life-threatening. So this is a hard choice to make. And I think that a lot of the efforts out there are trying to crack that. But in order to really be able to change the game, to create like a whole new way of looking at this, I think what we need to do is to be able to break that deadlock, to really ask, like, what are the things we can leverage in existing proteins that we know work in kind of modulating, changing your immune system, and yet kind of engineer for, design for a far better patient experience by, really reducing or getting rid of the parts that are creating these harsher effects.
Yeah, I mean, the approach, I like that. I like the fact that, you're looking at it from a source perspective and from a therapeutic perspective. And, you mentioned a minute ago about the fact that, when you were in school, and so, I'm 47 years old. When I was in school, it was like, I never remembered having to be segregated from anyone at the lunch table. Right. My kids are now in high school, and they grew up, coming through elementary school in particular. And even now in high school, it's an everyday thing. Like I know plenty of kids, plenty of their peers who are, who suffer from peanut allergies in particular. Is there any insight out there? Like what does sort of the literature say about why the indication has become so prevalent? Do we know?
Yeah. I mean, I think first I'd say I agree with you. I just don't remember this. And now many people call this an epidemic, right? Mm-hmm. It's like 1 to 2%, I think, of the population is actually allergic to peanut. Only like 8% to food allergies. And the important thing to remember here is obviously the effect is far beyond the patient, has impact on the direct family, on the surrounding family. It's enough to have one kid in the class with an allergy, and sometimes the entire school is affected by it, right? I think this is the part that I was talking about before, that there's so much unknown still in this field. Like there isn't one scientifically backed explanation that everyone aligns behind. There are different theories around hygiene and toxins in our environment and many different kind of hypotheses, but there isn't one that's really scientifically backed that everyone agrees that this is the core reason, the root cause of what we're seeing. And this is something that some of the data, for example, that Ukko is gathering can hopefully help also unlock beyond the therapy itself, which we are designing and developing.
Yeah, it is like, I mean, I've heard all that stuff, right? Like I've heard we're too clean. We're too clean a society. We don't expose ourselves to anything anymore. So therefore we find everything to be, an allergen. The theories, they're far and wide, but the problem is certainly front and center.
Yeah. And I think, as I said before on the hopeful time, I do think that it is solvable, and we will solve it in the coming years, and that this is the hopeful time.
When you're striving to excel in a new arena, the best guides are the ones already doing it well. The Business of Biotech brings those voices forward to help new and emerging biopharmas turn their innovations, like mRNA and cell and gene therapies, into clinical realities. Tune in and subscribe for insights on hiring, regulatory, and other need-to-know topics for biopharma leaders. The podcast is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. Give us some more color on that, the solution that's in the works at Ukko. I want to start with sort of what the general philosophy is around protein engineering there, like what that looks like in practice, what that might result in terms of the therapeutic itself. And then a little bit further down the road, I want to talk about computational biology. I mean, I know it seems like, man, I'm telling you, every time I talk to a company, an Israel-based company, we go to tech real fast. You guys are high tech there. I mean, advanced, cutting edge, super smart. So I can't wait to hear about that part of it. But
nice. Yes. So sure. I could, at the basis for Ukko, we built a platform that combines AI, very, very advanced protein engineering, and immunology. And it really allows us to go to a protein and design it for the characteristics we seek. So
Mhm.
we want to maintain, for example, certain biophysical and biochemical characteristics of the protein, stability and its function. And in some aspect, in a very simplified version, let's say kind of curative parts, the parts of the protein that are actually helping modulate the immune system, and design away the parts that are, triggering the immune response in patients with these conditions. Now, our approach is based kind of on 3 steps. The first step is really mapping. So we've gathered hundreds and hundreds of blood samples from all over the world in our labs, and we use it, first of all, to just gather data. What is it on the protein that is actually triggering this immune response? And how are you different than me, different than someone else? And this is where I was talking before about unlocking data. This is really important for our understanding of what is going on here with food allergies, and why are some people being triggered one way and other people another. So that's the first part, we map. The second part is the design. This is really where the platform comes in, because now that we understand what on the protein is happening, we can now go to the protein and start to design it, right? And really what we do, you can think about it like microengineering, really precision engineering. We go to the protein and we make atomic level changes to it such that we achieve that result that we want, that balance between the parts that we want to keep and the parts that we want to get rid of. And in order to ensure that we've done this, we test it. We go back to the samples and we test them back on samples that, before showed reaction to the native protein, to natural protein. Now we want to test and show that our modified proteins do not cause or trigger that reaction. So we do it both on samples that we have and on used samples, and of course, eventually in clinical trial.
Mhm.
But the big picture here is that at the end of this, you get a protein that in many respects is equal to the regular protein in its behavior and what we wanted to achieve for the immune system. But the goal is to really get rid of the parts that are triggering the allergic response.
Now
And I'll just say that opens whole new worlds for what is possible here. Because even if you think about routes of administration, when you have a toxic peanut as the main kind of compound which you want to use for therapy, there's a limit in how you can administer it to patient, because of course, the main thing we want to keep all the time is patient safety, right? So if you're able to lower kind of that threat level of the safety, suddenly lots of new things open up for you as far as dose levels and routes of administration, the way you want to approach the problem. And we're looking at different aspects of this in our therapy, in our new approach.
Okay. Is the protein engineering approach the same or very similar both on the food manipulation side and the therapeutic side? I'm not a scientist, so I'm trying to get my mind.
Yeah, no, great question.
Yeah. So is it, I mean, on the food side, would it be a matter of re-engineering these proteins and then bioengineering the actual plant?
Yeah, so on the food side, I would say 2 things. We do have an asset in gluten that is actually focused more on the food side for people with celiac and sensitivity. And there, the balance you want to achieve in the design is, let's simplify for a minute. We'll say the good that we want to keep, right, is the functionality, is the part of the protein that's actually going to be nutritional and tasty and act yummy and wonderful when you bake with it. But you want to kind of design a way to get rid of the parts that are actually triggering the immune response in people with sensitivity. Once you have that protein, you can put it in different engines of production. You can scale it up through fermentation, or as you mentioned, through plants. And yes, then you have to engineer the plants in order to express or to have that, let's call it fermented good protein, instead of the existing protein that's causing these triggers for people with a sensitivity. So the base technology is the same, just the application and the way you scale it is different.
On the therapeutic side, and again, it's the simplistic thinking, but I'm curious. So is the I guess the base, the general approach, what we're trying to achieve here is to introduce a protein, almost like a vaccine, like we're introducing a protein to the patient that is going to stimulate, or I'm sorry, not stimulate their immune system and train the immune system to not react to
regular peanuts. That's right. The question that we want to answer, is it possible to really modulate the immune system without triggering the allergic reaction at the same time? And by the way, it's built on a lot of pieces of existing studies that have shown the pieces of what we're trying to do work, but we're bringing together the puzzle in a unique way. And, it will really, really shift the game of how we look at the ability to kind of, approach and treat protein-based allergy in general.
Yeah, very cool. Are there other companies that are kind of looking at the same science or working with the same science in your space, or is this pretty unique?
So first of all, there's a lot of innovation going on right now in the space of food allergy, which is so great to see. When we started Ukko, I think it was just beginning, and because of the approval of the FDA of a food allergy drug, and because of the culmination of lots of efforts across academia and some of the patient organizations and some of the entrepreneurs who really decided to jump in and do this, there's a lot of exciting things going on. I think Ukko has a unique approach because of the way we harness really an intersection of technologies, of using AI and immunology and this protein design, as I said before, to look at a single protein and really micro-engineer it for the goals that we want in order to break that deadlock. So this idea that you can go and say, what are the characteristics I want an existing protein? This is a food protein to have in order to achieve my goals is unique.
Yeah. Looking forward, should you get to the point where manufacturability, scale up, becomes imminent, like we need to do this, based on what you know now about your approach to protein engineering, what are your thoughts on its manufacturability, on its, at scale?
Yeah, I mean, for our peanut therapeutic, this is a drug. It's a synthetic drug, and we're already, by the way, in development and GMP development towards our clinical trials, and it'll be very standard kind of scale-up production for this purpose.
Cool, good deal. So the computational biology element, I'm curious about this, and I'm supposing I'm going to assume that it probably wasn't a giant hurdle for you to clear, because when the company formed up, as you said, it was a raw kind of piece of clay, right? So, you probably adapted and adopted the tools as you needed them. For many biopharmaceutical companies that kind of grew up in the wet lab, the adoption of computational biology tools is foreign. So I think you could provide some nice insight to our audience around the infrastructure, like what goes into leveraging computational biology from a tech and personnel standpoint. So give us some color on that. Like, at what point did you realize, like, we're going to need to apply some in silico, AI, machine learning, whatever those tools might be, you tell me, but we're really going to kind of squeeze all the juice we can out of these high-tech tools to work toward this bioengineered protein.
Yeah. So happily for Ukko, computational biology, or AI, was really part of our origin story. And as I mentioned, my co-founder, Professor Anat Binur, this is really his expertise. And we began looking at the problem through this lens, which I think gave us a really unique perspective to begin with. Okay, so just explain what we do with computation and then kind of how we integrated it into our team. First part, as I said before, is this mapping that Ukko does. So when we have all these hundreds and hundreds of blood samples from around the world, wow, this generates a ton of data, right? So first step is really we use these algorithms, what's called AI, to process and analyze and just figure out the conclusions from the data, right? So we really try to, as I said before, use computational, mix with this data and understand, like, what is it on the protein that's actually triggering the response. The second piece where computational plays a big part for Ukko is prediction and design. Because now we've mapped, now we use our computational tools to understand what are these changes we actually want to make, such that, as I said before, we keep that balance all the time between what we want to keep and what we want to get rid of. So we constantly use the computational tools to kind of predict the best possible design for the proteins. And the nice thing about this is that it really allows us super fast iterations, right? Because our comp team can come up with a lot of options on a matrix will be kind of graded in different ways across the variables we're trying to maximize for. And we have the ability to kind of pick and test the best ones. And I'll say one more thing, and then I'll talk about how we structured into the company. Just maybe I keep putting my VC hat back on. But, VCs often ask this question of entrepreneurs, like, so, but why now? Like, why now? Like, why wasn't this done before? And I think the comp piece is a huge part of this, right? Because in the past, kind of previous methods for protein design really leaned on really big experimental efforts. They were based on a lot of trial and error, and it required lots of time and very heavy lifting and resources. And for Ukko, the fact that we have this AI at the basis allows us to really focus on the design and move really, really quickly on the iterations.
Yeah.
Kind of just one thing on the operational side, I think that because we're asking kind of how we integrated, and
Yeah.
that's, I think, interesting. First, it's really hard today to find people that sit right at the intersection of what we're looking for as far as talent, because you want someone that really understands structural biology, but also is very strong on the AI and kind of computational part of what we're looking for. And I keep saying, if anyone asked me what to go study today, I would say this, a combination of these two things, because they sit at the basis of almost everything that we're going to be innovating on in the next few years. So for us, this is really important in the way we build our team. And the second thing is literally office design. Like one of the things that was really important for us is making sure that there's constant communication, that these groups are not siloed, that they don't meet in a meeting once every X time to kind of go over the data, but that the flow of information between experiment and computational happens in the way we structure our approach and our technology and the information flow in the company, but literally even in how the teams sit. And they sit very, very integrated for those purposes. So that's a bit of a non-tech angle and more like an operational angle, but it's something really cultural that has worked really well for us in this respect.
Sure. And I appreciate that you brought that up. It's, it's not the first time that I've heard this concept of, your computational biologists and your wet lab biologists, your machine people, your computation people and your lab people have to learn each other's language and work well together. So, I mean, just the juxtaposition of them in the office, it makes perfect sense. It really does. Yeah.
And for us, it's super fast iterations. Like they literally, the data flows back and forth on a daily basis. So the work here between the experimental and the computational, very, very integrated at Ukko.
How many people are with the company now?
We've passed the 50 mark.
Oh, congratulations. Yeah.
Thanks.
That's terrific. Where are you guys on the clinical journey?
So we're a preclinical company, and we're currently already in development and planning clinical trials in the next kind of year and a half to 2.
Yeah. Okay. What has to happen between now and then to make those clinical trials a reality?
Well, everything they have, the list is long, but this is, I think, the part of the process as opposed to research and kind of really discovering our targets and selecting our lead candidates. That's a little more straightforward in the sense that we really have to hit all our development milestones in order to submit to the regulators, get approval, and operationalize, put in place the clinical trial kind of operations so that we can start them on time and do them as best as possible.
Yeah, pretty exciting time. So the conversation around the culture there and sort of the positioning of people in the office and the way that they work together, it speaks to leadership. And we've reached the point in the podcast where the middle-aged American white guy asks the female CEO what it's like to be a female co-founder and CEO, which is always an uncomfortable question for me to ask because I'll tell you, I like to ask it because, some of the female CEOs and co-founders that I talk to come into the conversation, like in a pre-call, they'll say like, we have to talk about this because I'm a passionate advocate for women in STEM. And I want to talk about this. And other times I've asked and it's fallen flat because the woman that I'm interviewing says, are we still talking about this? Is this still an issue? Like, really, you're going to come at me with? So, but I have to, like, I want to know where you kind of fall on that continuum, right? What your perspective is and how you might parlay that perspective into advice for other, not just women, but minorities, atypical, we'll say, of historical biopharma leadership.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think we made a lot of progress. I'm always happy to talk about this because, and in general, I should say diversity, and we'll talk, happy to talk a little bit more about that in general. You can look around and I see in my daily experience, we need more women in leadership positions, definitely in the biotech and pharma world, as well as other industries. VC, which I came from, is another one. And I think there's a lot of work being done, but more to be done. I'll also say that for me, I usually want to flip the advice around. And before I start with the women trying to jump into this or in it, I actually think has to be kind of a joint effort of all the players, that are around the table. So usually I don't want to call it advice, but I like first to start the point of discussion with CEOs in general and executives and heads of HRs, and really say, first, diversity is important, right? There's endless studies that show that it's just the best way to solve problems. And teams that win are teams that are diverse. That's it. But diversity doesn't mean inclusion, right? Like just counting numbers and saying my team is 50% women. Wow, that's great. Or 30% or whatever it is. Inclusion really means being super thoughtful about what does it mean to build an organization that gives space to everyone and really leverages the diverse opinions, and what do you need to be aware of and how do you do this smartly and think about all aspects of it. And that requires something else. I think for women who are trying to kind of jump in, I reflect on my own experience. First of all, I would say no one should hesitate because there are these challenges. But when you go in, you should go in with an open mind. And for me, things that have been really important are, one, making sure I surround myself with really good resources that can help me. That is included really strong team around me and mentors. And I have to say management coaches too, which in general, I should say, something really important that CEOs should do for themselves and for their teams. It's really helpful. Having kind of that growth mindset is another thing. And another one, and I'm sure I think we all have this, but it's the voices in our head, not letting them hold you back, really having a serious conversation with them every time they come up. And
there's Dr. Binur talking to herself again.
That's right. That's right.
You bring up this point around management consulting and the value of diversity. What's the thought process around? So obviously, the CEO or co-founder of a 50-person startup biopharma, in many ways is no longer the sole, or maybe never was. I mean, you've got co-founders, you've got a scientific board. I'm sure you've got a board of directors. You're not like the sole decision maker. You're not setting, you're not checking every box of company tone.
Right.
So what goes into in your position aligning the board of directors, the scientific advisory board, the management team, all the way down to the person who's cleaning the floors, aligning those folks with the idea behind the value of diversity? I mean, and how much effort does that take, and what goes into making sure that you're picking the right folks?
I think it's a great question, by the way, especially in a time like this when there's a lot of people ask a lot about crisis management, right? Just because the markets are so crazy and fundraising and so on. So I think a lot of effort should go into this. And first thing for CEOs, I think you have to be clear with yourself. Just what is driving you? What is the key thing that's important for you right now in the organization? Once you integrate also other opinions, the important thing is to align everyone from the macro to the micro. And it's very, very important because it's the only way that you can make sure that your vision and mission is super aligned with the operations that happen on a daily basis. And to do that, you have to make sure that you can first articulate clearly what you're trying to achieve. And second, I think that you have these kind of management cycles, I'll call them, or kind of, daily workflows, weekly, monthly. What does it look like in your company as far as what type of meetings happen and what messages get conveyed by who, when, and to make sure that those are all aligned. So for me, making sure that I'm clear, that I've conveyed this to my board. I've heard the feedback, by the way, it's all at then an integration, but that I've aligned with my board. And then that message really is aligned with how our executive team sees things. And then each of them goes to their managers and to their teams, and that there is kind of a cross-organization alignment on what we're trying to achieve. What are we trying to achieve this year, this quarter, this month, this week? And by the way, I do check-ins with the team, I have a 30-minute type of walk around the block, actually with random. It's totally random. Every week someone else, is the meeting scheduled with someone else across the team, across all kind of, groups and functions and so on. And one of the questions that's always most important for me to ask is, do you feel that every morning when you come into the organization, it's clear to you what you're doing and why you're doing it?
Mm-hmm.
And if that's not clear, we have a problem.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think actually that kind of communication is really, really important in driving culture, mission, and effectiveness.
Yeah. Well, you've certainly applied those skills across multiple. I'm just sitting here, I'm looking at the clock, Dr. Binur, and I'm thinking like we're running short on time. I wanted to ask you about meat. I know that's an important cause. Can you give us 2 minutes on that?
Yeah. And meat, just to tie actually that idea with everything we've been talking about, because you asked about diversity and kind of my connecting the dots type of career, right? So when I started Ukko, it's been interesting for me to now reflect back and realize how many of the things I brought into Ukko from worlds of policy and government and meat, which is a nonprofit that I'll tell you about in a sec, in ways that I think are not conventional for a biotech company. And the fact that I came from these interdisciplinary worlds really, really helped and enriched. And it's just a point in case, it's a case in point for why diversity of experience and kind of life viewpoints is so important. So meat is very much my other baby. It's a nonprofit organization that I started together with a few co-founders almost 18 years ago now. And the goal is we're really focused on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And the idea is to really create a future network of Palestinian-Israeli leaders that share a common language and a passion to really driving change in our community. And we do it through a program that runs kind of for excelling high school students. We teach them technology, computer science, entrepreneurship, leadership, and a lot of conflict resolution, a lot of identity work. It's a very intense program that runs for 3 years along their high school years, and then continues as they graduate. We run it today with MIT and Facebook and Google and Salesforce and many, many other companies that are involved. And we have, 1,000 alumni now in key positions kind of all over kind of our region, starting to really create change, social and political and economic change, and hopefully a brighter future for our communities here.
Yeah. So how long ago did you start meat?
We started back, it's now, I think, 19 years ago.
Wow, 19 years. Geez. Yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to invite you to date yourself there, Dr.
No, no worries. It's been a joyful journey. Unfortunately, things here are, not in the best place that we would want them to be politically, but hopefully meat helps create a brighter future for everyone here.
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah, and politics is one thing, but it sounds to me like the program sort of takes takes some of that political turmoil and angst and distills it down to a point where you can create interactions among future business leaders and technology leaders and people who are going to be solving these problems where it kind of matters. I don't want to say more than on the political stage or arena, but where action happens, right? Where good things happen. Am I reading that right?
Yeah. And it also really comes from the idea that networks matter. The people in your life change the way you look at the world. Yeah. And they are the resources with which you can kind of start to solve problems. And when people are really, segregated from each other, siloed from each other, they don't look at problems in the same way. They don't have the joint resources to solve them. So it's very true. This is true for the business world and for the nonprofit world and for the political world. And what we want to do here is to create a really rich network of super talented young leaders that are very diverse and are Palestinian-Israeli, and that they will work together to create a much better future for my kids and for future generations here in general.
Awesome work. Where can people learn more about meat? Is there a website?
Yes, it's meet.org, www.meet.org.
meet.org and Ukko. You can check out Ukko. Ukko won't be hard to find. Ukko.
Yeah, it's ukko.us, by the way.
Beautiful. All right. Well, we're up against the time limit here, Dr. Binur, but I really enjoyed the conversation. Super enlightening. You're a brilliant and beautiful person, and I appreciate the fact that you spent the time with us.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been great.
Our pleasure. So that's Ukko co-founder and CEO, Dr. Anat Binur. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online in partnership with Cytiva. Check us out at bioprocessonline.com and explore Cytiva's commitment to emerging biotechs at Cytiva.com/emerging biotech. If you like what you're hearing every week on the Business of Biotech, subscribe, be kind with the stars you give us, tell your friends about us, and as always, thanks for listening.